your people die. It is no new thing. And the stack of wood grows higher and higher, and a helpless rage seems to set my brain on fire.
Welcome back to Reality Asserts Itself on the Real News Network, and we're continuing our discussion with singer, songwriter, virtuoso guitarist Bruce Cockburn. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
So, Bruce, you write, as I mentioned in the last part of the segment, Mercury occupies a keystone position, mercury poisoning, in my evolution as an artist correspondent. I thought that was an interesting phrase, artist correspondent. And you write a little bit later, it has to be art. There's an important line to be drawn between art and propaganda. Now, so where does that line fall for you, and what's an artist correspondent, and this issue of art and politics?
Well, these words they're all terms of convenience, really, because, hyphenated things. I'm an artist. That's how I think of myself. As much as I think about it at all, which is not very much, but if somebody asks me. But the correspondent part applies to a lot of what I've done, and, well, in a certain way, all of it, I suppose, because what I with hindsight, I didn't start out this way. I didn't start out thinking about things this way, but I've come to see the process through which I work as kind of like making a film. And a lot of the films a lot of the filmmaking, let's say, that's gone into my songs has been documentary in nature. A lot of it. Gavin's Woodpile is a case in point. The songs that came later from Central America are even more so. But, and partly that's, I think I can thank Allen Ginsberg for some of the influence on that, because the stuff he wrote in the 70s about traveling through America, and is very much like that and influenced me. But a lot of it is just an attempt to distill the emotional content of what I encountered into some communicable form, and one of the ways that I've found I can do that is by creating these pictures. So often a song will be a combination of more or less cinematic moments juxtaposed in some way that makes them add up to, I hope, something meaningful, and that aren't in themselves necessarily directly related. I have a lot of songs like that. The Charity of Night, there's 3 completely different scenes over a long period of time, united hopefully by the chorus that kind of pulls it all together.
Big city Europa, July of '64. It's 5 a.m., weather blowing bitter off the Baltic. The car slows beside him as he walks. Hubcap slow revolution, jaundiced looking pockmarked face, round in window, a short greasy black beard. A couple of language stabs settle on English. It's cold. I give you ride? Don't you want to kiss me? This goes on halfway across the cobbled bridge. The driver pulls ahead, gets out by the construction fence, ambles toward him, rubbing the bulge in his pants.
Then a lot of my songs, I rely on visual imagery very strongly, very heavily. So, and on the feeling that the things I encounter visually produce in me. So it's the feeling that, as I said, kind of gets the juices flowing. But the content will end up drawing heavily from the visual side of things.
A lot of artists, musicians and otherwise, but particularly in music, went through the 60s and wrote and continued to write about love, about if they were on a spiritual path, they kind of wrote about the spiritual path, and to a large extent, they wrote to make money. You increasingly wrote about real stuff, and I'm not suggesting the spiritual path isn't also a reality, but you wrote about politics, you wrote about what was going on in the world, what was wrong in the world, and one, it's not the best way to make money in the music industry. It's not the best way to break through in the US, although ironically, Rocket Launcher did, but generally speaking, political music is not what gets played on American radio.
No, it was an
So
anomaly.
you made some choices there that were, down a certain road.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't very difficult choices to make. I never wrestled with any of it that I can recall. I mean, I was lucky enough to grow up in a household where material needs were taken care of without me having to think about it. My dad, as a practicing physician, made good money, but he never talked about how much he made and would never tell us anything about it, and didn't like hearing it even discussed. He didn't want us to sit around talking about how much other people made. He was uncomfortable with all that. And but the basic needs were always taken care of without any kind of question. So that gave me a kind of a start in life that said to me, money doesn't matter very much.
But also, a lot of musicians and writers, it's more about self-realization. It's more about how they feel.
Yeah.
You
Well, it was
write
for
in
me
your
too.
music was very much about having some influence, some
Yeah,
change,
but
some effect on the world.
But really, for me, it started out the same way. If you listen to the songs that you could say are spiritual observations from their first album, second album, they're very interior in their orientation, and they are all about me.
Oh, Jesus, don't let Toronto take my song away.
But over time, I mean, I take my spiritual involvement very seriously, and so I feel like I was led. Somebody else might call it something else, but I've been led into situations that produced different effects on me. So I'm in a marriage, and the marriage is great for a while, then it's not so great, then it gets good again, and it's not, just like any other relationship. But during those times when it's not so great, well, I could sit around writing bitchy songs about how terrible my relationship is, or I could be looking for how to fix it and writing about that, and realizing in the context of some of these kinds of moments where realizing my own insufficiency. I can't do this without help. I can't be the person I imagine myself being by myself. God's got to help. For me, that's what it came down to. Maybe other people might be luckier and somebody right next to them would help. But for me, it was, I needed God to do that. So, and He did.
Lord, let us not betray. God bless the children with visions of the day.
Over time, a long time, right? It's a work in progress still, but the big turning point came for me really. The setup took longer. Like in the earlier part of the '70s, it started happening from travel, from encounters with new people and people from different backgrounds. But really, when I got divorced, or when that relationship ended, it's not really about the divorce, but just the end of the relationship was pretty traumatic for me. And it was traumatic partly because I had made a promise, and as had my wife, to God to be together forever, no matter what, in a church. You know, church I didn't take particularly seriously, especially as early as the actual wedding took place at the end of 1969. It was like, I liked the idea of getting married in a church because I was obsessed with the Middle Ages, and I liked the stained glass in the tower and stuff, you know. But and the stones, but later on, it became not so much about the building and much more about why people build buildings like that.
Sometimes you're made to feel as if your love's a crime.
When we broke up, it's like I had to face this. It's like I made a promise, and God seems to be saying it's okay to have broken it.
How did he say that?
Well, he didn't kill us, for one thing, right? We didn't get struck by lightning.
But you didn't have a fundamentalist view of God.
Well, no, I tried to at first, but it didn't take. You know, because the first thing I didn't, we talked about this, having grown up surrounded by the trappings of Christianity, it didn't really mean much to me until much later, when I began to see my own spiritual growth and journey in Christian terms. So I started going to a church eventually. And then I'm sort of going, okay, well, you know, when the trauma associated with the breakup came along, it's like, well, okay, what do you think about this, God? I mean, here I am. I felt terrible, as did my wife, you know, about having broken this promise. And the feeling that came back from this was, it's okay. You know, this is life. Life isn't necessarily smooth, and you know. There was no judgment coming from God about this. There was no sense of being required to pay a penalty for it or anything like that. It was just like, let's move on. Let's go to the next place. And the next place for me was, okay, you spent all this time talking about you and your interior relationship with the divine, et cetera, et cetera. What does it mean to love your neighbor? I didn't grow up. The word love was never used in our household, really, growing up. It was there. The phenomenon was there, but not the word. And so what does it mean to love your neighbor? Well, you know, that took some digging. I embraced the community culture in a big way, and kind of consciously because of that.
Heaven's perfect alchemy, put me with you and you with me. Come on, put that in your heart. Come on, put it in your heart.
Please join us for the continuation of our series of interviews with Bruce Cockburn on Reality Asserts Itself on the Real News Network.